Thank you so much for that introduction. This project was done by YPA Sri Lanka. YPA is an international network of peer educators on sexual rights and sexual health and reproductive health. And YPA Sri Lanka was started in 2009. And in Sri Lanka, we do advocacy and peer education on sexual health, reproductive health, and rights. And we have worked with the National Youth Services Council, Ministry of Women Affairs and Child Development, Young Women's Christian Association, and Rotary International so far. So this project, we named this project as the Finding the Missing Piece. This was an initiative done by the Sri Lanka Association of Deaf People. So basically, they were trying to develop the leadership skills of 70 young people living with hearing disabilities, deaf young people, by a leadership training program which happened for like 4 days, and they wanted to include a component on sexual education in the leadership training program. And YPers were invited to conduct this session. So before the session, we had a couple of planning sessions because it was quite new for us as well. We usually conduct peer education training programs for general young people, but it was really a kind of a challenging process to start, develop a new curriculum to work with young people with hearing disabilities. The project was developed with the support of United Nations Population Fund Sri Lanka office, and I personally would like to thank Anne Murray from Ireland. She was a VSO volunteer who was volunteering for the Sri Lanka Federation of Sri Lanka Association of Deaf People, and also Sarah Soisa and Tushi Vijayanathan, who were the trainers of the project we conducted for these people, and those two were from the YP Sri Lanka. So after the planning stage, we were able to come up with these two objectives. One was to determine the level of awareness on HIV among young people with hearing disabilities in Sri Lanka. Basically, we came up with this because in Sri Lanka, we rarely discuss the importance of HIV with disabled young people, even though the young people with disabilities has considered to be a vulnerable population in terms of accessing information on HIV and AIDS. And second objective was to address the sexual and reproductive health rights issues of young people with hearing disabilities by giving them access to information, because they have lack of access to information and there's no specific curriculum for them to be taught on comprehensive sexuality education in schools. This is the method we used to conduct the project. This was actually a pilot project of a national campaign to raise awareness on HIV and sexual reproductive health and rights, initiated by the Sri Lanka Association of Deaf People. And we selected 70 young people from who were the members of SLADF. And as I said before, it was a 4-day training program, so we got one full day to train them and gather information on the barriers they face receiving information on HIV and AIDS. In order to conduct the session, we hired a professional interpreter, and then we had a couple of meetings with the interpreter, and then we decided to sensitize her on the sexual and reproductive health and rights, and also about the sign language terms she would use when she was conducting the session. Because in the planning meetings, we found out that for specific terms which we use in peer education, in sign language, there are no signs. I think that's what the chair mentioned earlier as well. For rape, violence, abuse, they have the same sign, but we exactly wanted the participants of the training to understand the clear message, what we are trying to tell them. So I put a couple of slides on the results we gathered from the training program. And before the training, we actually conducted the pre-test. And then we had difficulties in conducting a written pre-test, because most of the young people who were there has not gone to school, and then they had difficulties in writing. So we used the sign language interpreter to ask the questions in sign language, and then the young people were using signs to answer back, and then we noted their responses. So we asked questions like, what is the difference between HIV and AIDS? What are the body fluids involved in transmitting HIV? How to protect yourselves from HIV? Simple questions about HIV and AIDS, but it's quite surprising because 30% of the participants didn't know what HIV was, and there was only 70% who knew exactly the difference between HIV and which is something really, really basic in terms of HIV and AIDS prevention. And out of the 70 young people, 35 of them were males and 14 were females. This also highlighted that the importance of involving more young women, more girls who are living with disabilities in the HIV response. And almost 96% of them said that they didn't receive sexual education in schools, and even the people who said they received sexual education, they clearly mentioned that it was not comprehensive. It didn't cover the gamut of comprehensive sexual education. And after the information session, we were able to get a positive response of 97% people, young people, knowing how to use a condom properly. And they also highlighted throughout the stigma they face in accessing services, health services in in the villages, in the communities. And the stigma was actually like two-sided. One is the general stigma when young people go into a pharmacy and asking for a condom, but specifically they had stigma because they were young people with hearing disabilities, and the attitude towards young people with disabilities being engaged in sexual activities was also a huge stigma and discrimination they had to face when they were buying condoms from the pharmacies. One of the main barriers we faced was that even though we had the sensitization program with the interpreter, she still faced difficulties in finding proper terms to communicate certain words when she was conducting the session. And after the session, we discussed and we had a really good chat with the United Nations Population Fund of Sri Lanka, and then we at the moment developing a sign language curriculum, sign language sort of a document where you have the specific terms which we use for which we use to conduct sexuality education. So there will be sign language glossary, that's the word I was missing, sign language glossary with the support of UNFPA Sri Lanka. And then the workshop brought a success of 95% satisfaction from the people who attended, and they kept on saying that there are only 70 people, but the whole school of their whole school should get the training in CSC, not only for one day, maybe for like 4 or 5 days, which should be very comprehensive. And then to turn it into a training of trainers program that their skills would be enhanced so that they would go back to their communities and would be able to transfer the knowledge they receive from the training to their peers. And we were also able to identify a couple of people who were willing to become peer educators. And then we decided to gather around the sign language interpreters and then train them first before training the young people with hearing disability, so that the interpreters would be able to communicate properly when they're conducting sessions, when they're communicating, and then the young people would have access and there won't be any communication barriers when maybe when they would report abuse, or maybe they, like when they're expressing themselves. So they will find specific terms to communicate specifically on sexual and reproductive health. As the next step, we are making a forum for young people with hearing disabilities, and we are planning to get the Minister of Social Services on board. Minister of Social Services in Sri Lanka is a government body which is having the ownership of the national policy on disabled people. So we'll be getting the government on board, and we have also discussed with the Lanka Business Coalition so that the corporate sector would also be involved in order to make these kind of projects sustainable, because funding is a very important component. And then maybe the corporate sector would be able to help us in conducting these sessions in a sustainable manner, so that they could also promote in their corporate service, CSR, corporate social responsibilities. I would also like to thank the Family Planning Association Sri Lanka, the International Planned Parenthood Federation, and also again the UNFPA Sri Lanka, and also the YPA team who played a major role in making this project a success, and who are still supporting us to sustainably develop these kind of projects for young people living with hearing disabilities. Thanks.